can start this webinar. 75 and counting participants, very good. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. It's great to see you all here. I can see quite a few familiar names, but I also see a lot of new names, which is fabulous. Very good to have you all here. This webinar will be recorded and it will be made available on the Ayala YouTube channel later today. In order to conserve bandwidth, I would like you to ask you to switch off your cameras, please, during the presentation, and also mute your microphones, if you would, please. If you have any questions, you can post the questions in the chat box during the presentations, and we will attend to these at the end of the webinar. So, Mr. Nopadol, would you please turn off your camera, and also Juama? Everybody, please turn off your cameras, except, of course, the presenters when we come to them. So, my name is Omar Fritz Eriksson, and I am the Deputy Secretary General of Ayala, and also the Dean of the Ayala Worldwide Academy. And I welcome you to this webinar, which is a part of a series of webinars designed to inform a wider audience on the most recent outcomes of the work of the 4 technical committees. Mr. Nopatol and Sunil, please turn off your cameras because it is better for the bandwidth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Good to have you here, by the way. Yeah. So the work of the 4 technical committees. The committees have a 4-year work cycle where they put a lot of effort into developing standards, recommendations, guidelines, and other documents, which then are published and made available as guidance worldwide to all our members. The recommendations tell us what one should be doing when providing marine aviation navigation services, and the guidelines tell us how to do it, more practical approach or best practices worldwide. Once the committees have developed the document, it is submitted to our council for approval. And once the council has approved the document, it is published and made available to the world on our website. Today, we will present to you a guideline 1081, G1081, which is titled Use of Virtual Aids to Navigation. This document was originally published in 2012, and we will have some background in the presentation, but has now been through a major revision to reflect better contemporary knowledge and technology. Guideline 1081 goes together with recommendation R0143, which is titled Provision of Virtual Aids to Navigation. And this one was first published in 2010, so it's a decade old, more than a decade, but has also gone through a major revision and was approved by our council in June this year together with the guideline. The recommendation recommends that those providing marine aids to navigation services should consider deploying virtual aids to navigation as deemed practical and necessary, and as the volume of traffic justifies and degree of risk requires. So it's up to the individual competent authority to decide what they think is needed. The recommendation also recommends that measures to raise awareness of the use and limitations associated with virtual aids should be considered. So this is all the basic recommendations that we have, and then the guideline tells us how to go about it. And we have other guidelines as well, which are a bit, perhaps a bit older, but we have 3 speakers doing the presentation today. The first speaker is Mr. Mats Hörström, who works at the Swedish Transport Agency. There he is a nautical advisor and responsible for handling ASO navigation, comprehensive permits, rules, supervision, and registration. So he is a regulator. His professional background is as a mariner from the Royal Swedish Navy, where he started his career in 1984, some years ago. Mats has contributed to the work of IALA since 2010 and is a standing member of the ARM committee. The second speaker is Mr. Yves Schack, who is the e-navigation coordinator for the central region of the Canadian Coast Guard. Yves has 30 years of experience in marine navigation services with the Coast Guard, working in diverse fields such as marine traffic, communication, radio navigation, Arctic, and aids to navigation operations and systems design. Now, the Arctic is an interesting region when we talk about virtual aids to navigation. There is clearly an opportunity there. We will hear about that, I think. Yves is a graduate of the Quebec Marine Institute and is a regular contributor to the work of IALA. Our third speaker today is Mr. Kjell Johansson, who works at the Swedish Maritime Administration, not the transport agency, but the administration, where he is responsible for the Swedish terrestrial AIS network, which of course will carry some virtual signals. Kjell has been involved in the development of virtual AIS for several years. He's quite interested in all sorts of navigational systems and has been a part of developing a national ACTIS-like tool for processing data from fairway markings and lighthouse sectors. Kjell is also a great contributor to our work in IALA and has participated in the ARM committee, ACE Navigation Requirement and Management Committee since 2019. So I have understood that the three of you will divide the presentation between you and that you will start, Mats. I hope that is correct. So please, I must ask everybody to turn off their the videos during the presentation. Mr. Per Stenhammar, Mr. What do we have here? Noppadol and Mr. David, please turn off your cameras. David, the button is yeah. Switch off the camera, please. Okay, well, so Mats, you have the floor.
Thank you, Umar, for your kind introduction. Please, will you confirm when you can see our presentation in your screen?
Nothing yet. No, something is coming up. No. We see nothing yet, Mats.
I hope you can see the presentation now.
No, not yet. You need to share and then select the window you want to share.
Yeah, I have to select the window.
Mr. Lama Tang, please switch off your camera because we don't want cameras on while the presentation is going on. Yeah, nothing coming up yet, Mats.
Nothing coming up yet. Okay. We tried to find out what the problem is. Just a moment, please.
Yes, we are patient. Does anybody else have a copy of it?
Yeah, sure.
One of the other presenters, perhaps? Yeah. Kel, can you share? Ah, there we are. Now we have it from somebody. I can see a sailboat.
Yeah. So,
Is it mine?
okay.
Is that the second slide? Here?
Ayala webinar G1081, blue screen. That's
Yes.
the presentation. I can see it now, yes.
Perfect. Sorry for the delay.
Okay, so Mats, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues around the world, on behalf of my task leader and the group, I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our presentation about the virtual ATOM. We are well aware that some of you have both knowledge and experience about the virtual ATOM. But for those of you who are not familiar with this type of ATOM, we hope that this webinar will give you new lessons. Our focus today will be limited to virtual ATOM by follow the common thread. The list of advantages and disadvantages of virtual ATOM can be made long, but here are some examples. With permission from the national authorities, it's normally quick and easy to establish virtual ATOM. Regarding economic aspects, this must not decide when choosing between virtual and physical ATOM, but it's the nautical function that decide the need. The limitation is regarding to not everybody has access to active or mobile application for navigation issues. In addition, knowledge is required to be able to use the function correctly so as not to mislead mariners. We will give here you a general recommendation when using ATOM. In order to make the right decision before choosing of ATOM, risk analysis is normally necessary to carry out before establishment. Virtual ATOM should therefore be considered as a suitable complement to physical ATOM, due to not all mariners will be fitted out to see the virtual ATOM on board. To follow the common thread, we have created the following agenda. And I will start with the background about our work. And after that, so we'll continue with policy, concept. Kjell will give you a brief about the international standard of symbols. Yves continue with naming. And I will give you, after that, information about the test of virtual ATOM in Sweden. And at the same time, it will also give you information about the similar test in Canadian waters. After that, it's time for a conclusion by Yves. And finally, if you have any questions, so are we open. Therefore, we hope that the content meet your expectation and you will enjoy this moment. So let me start with the background to our work. We would like to thank all participants for valuable contribution. No one mentioned, no one forgotten. Therefore, we believe that our work has been very well anchored through this global network. Our assigned task 161 is in accordance with the JALA RM Decide task list for the working period 2018 to 2022. To structure the work, we divide the task into 4 different phases. The work began at the first committee meeting for this work period at the JALA office in Paris in autumn of 2018, where we start by analyzing the task by taking part of the experience from JALA Workshop 2016 in Seoul about the virtual ATOM. Our task was to revise the two existing documents concerning the recommendation and guideline. We decided to start with the guideline to gain time. RM11 was the last physical meeting, and since then we have only met in digital committee meetings. We have also met between the committee meetings to be able to complete our task. The committees approved the two documents on RM13, and we submit them to JALA Council for final approval in June this year, after 2.5 years of work. The two new documents are now available for download on JALA website. I would like to give the floor now to my task leader, Yves, who will continue with policy.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. So we want to highlight a few policy items that are part now of the guidelines 1081. So the first one is related to the permanent usage of virtual AI Satan. Initially, there's a policy still valid dating from 2014, which restricted the use of virtual. But now we're adding a bit more flexibility into the documents, and this is based on some trials, the gain experience from authorities, and also the recognized benefit. So there is, for national authorities, where there is an improved confidence level regarding their usage, they can consider having them as a permanent. The second item that we want to remind is, and Omar has mentioned that in the introduction, it's important to do a proper risk analysis. So the addition of any AI Satan is a part of an ATON, an AI Satan, an ATON design and review system. So it's important that the competent authority follows some internal policies and level of service regarding this new technology. And finally, a very important point regarding virtual AI Satan as well as the other AI Satan is that although they're becoming more and more visible and displayed on shipborne system, we need to consider that the only minimum IMO requirement at this time is still the minimum keyboard display from the transponder. So we're looking forward for a mandatory display in future time, but fortunately, manufacturers and ship owners see the benefit of having those AI Satan display live into their shipborne system. So we're seeing more and more of that at this time. Next slide, please. Just a reminder here of the concept for those who are just beginning with virtual. So the concept of virtual is something that from the bridge window of a ship is not physically visible. You can look out the window and you won't see anything, so to say, in terms of aids to navigation. So this is a digital aids to navigation. So it's actually showing into the shipborne equipment. So as you can see here from the visual, there's a reef that's on the water. So actually, there's no physical H navigation associated with that reef, but there's going to be, in this case, it's programmed from the shore and it's going to the antenna of the AIS base station, and it's broadcast over the AIS frequencies up to the ship's antenna, and it's actually showing into the shipborne system at the right position with the right symbology and with the right text information. Next, please. So again, still in the basic concept for the virtual. The virtual is really a message 21, which is ITU, International Telecommunication Union format. And it usually comes from an AIS shore-based station, but you could have also physical AIS ATON units, such as on a buoy, that could be programmed with a few virtual. So it is displayed. You have two examples here. On the left, you would see it's showing it's displayed on an electronic charting system. And what I want to highlight is the box of information that you have. So there's different fields coming from that message 21, such as the name, type, MMSI, position, position type, and off position indicator. And you see on the right, it's shown on the radar. So you could, one important aspect is you would have the symbol and you would have to select. So click on the symbol in order, in that case, it's the TT, is the track target item that would populate this box of information. The symbology will be detailed right now from Shell. So next slide, please. Thank you.
There was a slight hiccup there with an echo, but carry on.
No, we're testing. We do it another way. Hello everyone, it's Kjell here. About this symbol, it's decided in the IEC document 62288, and that's regulated requirements for presentation of navigational related information on shipboard navigational displays and supported in IMO resolutions. Next, please. For this, this is virtual ATONs. It's marked with dotted lines and a different type of marks. And you can switch off. Next, please. The difference between a physical and a virtual is here is whole lines for the symbols. A physical ATON can be a physical AI ATON transponder installed in a fairway buoy, for example, and sending out their own position, their own data. And the virtual use you heard you talked about later, it's sending out from the shore station. Next, please. Here is examples for presentations in different chart systems. And the first picture with the story, it is Adveto, it's represented ECDIS systems with the correct presentation follow this standard. And here you see is a wreck and it's a dotted line for the symbol. The second picture is from shore office use system. It's not a navigation system, it's a presentation system you use on your office. And you see also the same picture, the same symbol, but the chart is not so good, but that's depend on what you load the chart. The third is it's an app you can use on iPad. You see, there's a good chart, but it's the wrong type of symbol because it's a line symbol, not dotted one. And then you see the marine traffic is probably familiar with all of you. It's a AIS website following ships, but it is not showing anything of this virtual. And Vessel Finder is the same localized system like marine traffic, and not showing anything at either. Next, please. Here is an example for symbols where we have military praxis, temporary marked for some exercise. And when the exercise is over, we of course switch it off. The positive thing with this virtual is you can easily activate it and you can easily deactivate it when the practice is over. Next, please. Back to you.
Thank you, Kjell. One element, and we're going to talk about the naming. So one element that we try to improve in the guideline was to have more uniformity and guiding principle for the naming. So what you see here is the from the message 21 I was just mentioning about earlier, is the first field is the name field. So there is a main one which has 20 characters. So it's important to consider here that there is some limitation in the number of characters that you can use. But fortunately, there is an extended one which has 14 more characters. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the AIS 8on, there was some report that the second field sometime was truncated or it was not showing appropriately. So you need to verify this, but you see the example on the right side where you have the full two name fields that are displayed on NICDIS, or rather it's an electronic charting system in that case. Next slide, please. So still regarding the naming, so Canada has done some kind of a survey, or rather a study of the worldwide naming, and there was a lot of inconsistencies in different countries regarding how they are naming their AIS 8on, including virtual. So we come up with some elements to consider. So first, and it's in the guideline. So it's suggested to use short names to reduce the cluttering. So you could use recognized abbreviation and acronyms. So keep in mind that on shipborne system, sometimes you have the name tag that is displayed all the time along with the vessel names for the target. So any too long names will clutter the screen of the shipborne system. So the second item is using numbering and lettering that respect the ILM Maritime Voyage system. So what we're talking here is really like the even and odd numbers, or the progression of when you're upbound or downbound, having some consistency with the actual H navigation system in place. The other point is to avoid repeating info already available from other message 21 fields. So you've seen already some information from other fields, such as the type of 8on, or the MMSI, or virtual. So one thing we noticed, for example, is that virtual was in the name. So you don't have to add virtual in the name because there's already a field that's going to tell the user that it's a virtual, and on top of that, you're going to have the proper symbology to validate that. And finally, there was some information regarding the maritime safety information, such as a nav warn number to be considered, but this might be difficult if you since it has a changing nature, so that could be difficult to reprogram, especially if it's coming from a floating aid out over in the water. So you have to consider that using MSI number will require some editing at some point for any cancellation or change into the numbering. Next, please. Up to you, Mats.
Yes, thank you. In 2019, Sweden conducted a test with the virtual ATON to mark temporary restriction areas. This is to increase our knowledge when using virtual ATON at the same time as we wanted to contribute our experience to our task group in Jala. In addition, our hope is that can be a good example for others who have similar needs. In Sweden, our challenge was to be able to meet future needs from users regarding virtual ATON. Therefore, we, Transport Agency and Maritime Administration, needed to raise our skills and knowledge through the test, which we were conducted 2019. We lacked our own resources to be able to carry out the test. For that reasons, the test was carried out in collaboration with the Swedish Armed Forces. Our idea was that we offered our know-how in exchange for testing the function with the virtual ATON when temporary restricted areas were cancelled for mariners during live fire exercise. The test period includes the phases planning, implementation, and evaluation. The Swedish Armed Forces has problem with violation of restricted areas during live fire exercise. Therefore, they were very interested in testing virtual ATON for this purpose in collaboration with us. The problem of violation of restricted areas at seas depend on where the areas are located in relation to the traffic situation into the ports, in fairways, routes, etc. The test was performed in regular exercise areas on 16 occasions. We improved the function over the time in terms of number and name of virtual ATON, which marked the other limit of the risk area. Start and stop of broadcasting of virtual ATON was coordinated by the Maritime Administration. Through the naval control, we have the opportunity to check if the vessels in the vicinity of the exercise areas saw virtual ATON on its own shipborne equipment. We create a questionnaire to provide answers to our questions. Some of the vessels could only answer question 1 and 4 with negative response. After compiling the results from the questionnaires, we realized, to our great surprise, that 67% of the vessels had seen the virtual ATON on their own shipborne equipment. Our insight was that the virtual ATON has the opportunity to reduce the number of violations to cancel restricted areas. The test has given us answers to our questions. Therefore, we feel ready to be able to meet the future needs. I hand over to Yves, who will continue with the test from the Canadian waters.
Thank you, Matt. So the approach for Canada was a bit different from Sweden. So we started by collecting information from different countries. So we started in 2016 an AIS ATON international survey. So the goal was to try to gather the best practices, so the benefit and limitation from the different countries. And as you can see here, there was many countries actually trialing the virtual AIS ATON. Some had deployed, most of them had deployed them, but there was a few that removed them. Next slide, please. So, like I mentioned, important information was collected on the condition for using them. And we collected also the user satisfaction as well as the justification for using the virtual. It was a valuable information in order to target some practical application that could be useful in our Canadian waters. So what you can see here is some of the response that we got. So there was, like you could see on top, there was marking an hazard near a route or isolated tensor, or delineate tracks. That were some of the most important answers that we got, most popular one. And some justification for using virtual as the only solution. Of course, the deep water was one of the main one, as well as the sea state and sensitive areas. And there was some response regarding a physical ATON not economically viable, or not meeting physical, not meeting reliability targets. So I guess there was a bit of insatisfaction with the physical ATON, AIS ATON at that moment. Next slide, please. So the next step was toward a workshop. We met with the mariners and we detailed the different approaches and what was done worldwide. And we tried to target some practical application into our own waters. So in 2017, we came with an agreement with mostly pilots to start trialing some virtual AIS ATON into Canadian waters. And we we agreed upon some proposed criteria. So you could see here some of the, there's 6 actually, and with room for expansion. So it was physical Layton practically impossible to deploy or maintain, which is I think a natural one. But you can also have like the one where you have a physical Layton causing interaction risk, or one where it damages sensitive environment. Next, please. What I'm going to show now is 4 examples. So there's more than that, but we focus on these 4 practical applications for the country. The first one is really, we're in restricted water, so there's really little room for errors. And one specific for Canada is really some issue with harsh weather, and especially ice, when there is very severe winter in Canada. So one of the issue is to be able to maintain a consistency in using radar targets. So here we have, you could see it's on Lake Saint-Pierre, and you have artificial islands. So there's artificial islands that are actually used for helping forming the ice cover, but they're also very important radar targets. So you could see on top the showing on a NEGDIS first, and then you would see the radar image during the winter where there is a lot of cluttering, ice cluttering, in fact. And it might be difficult to see, but there's actually the virtual AI Satan symbol, and the center of it, where you have the cross, is directly into the center of that small island. So that's quite an important target for the mariners. Next, please. Second example is quite unique. Is we come up with some reference point to assist in shipborne equipment validation check. So what we did is we created a pattern of 4 points with very accurate location for those 4 points, and also with some range and bearing that is provided to the client. So with that pattern, they're able to go into the shipborne system and validate how it is coming up in terms of the accuracy of the position for each of the virtual, and also the relation between 2 points or 4 points. So they could look at what is the bearing and distance and validate if that is equal to the reference pattern that has been provided to them. So this is interesting. For example, when a foreign ship is getting into pilotage waters and more restricted areas, so you have the pilot coming on board and not knowing that much the shipborne equipment and what are the radar error and such. So now they have mostly the portable pilot unit, but it doesn't carry any radar into this, of course. So with that make them more comfortable in detecting some offsets and errors that the shipborne equipment might have. Next slide, please. Another interesting practical application is when we have a buoy that's gone, disappear and gone off position, and we don't have the resources to proceed and put a floating aid to replace it for many days, if not weeks. So we come up with compensating, so to say, as an interim measure by broadcasting a virtual with the missing symbol attached to it. So in order to do that, you've got to program the virtual with the off position indicator. And when you activate that off position indicator, for those shipborne equipment that can manage this type of settings, you will have actually the symbol turn yellow and the missing in text yellow also showing on top, even on the radar. So it exists in radar in that case. Next, please. And the final example that I wanted to show is for the protection of the ocean, which is part of the Canadian Coast Guard mandate and our Department of Fishery and Ocean. So we come up with a way to highlight the dynamic speed reduction limits. So in order to protect the North Atlantic right whales, Transport Canada has put into application some static and some dynamic zone. And for the dynamic is when some whales are spotted, they would activate the zone. So ships will have to reduce their speed under 10 knots. So we come up with this way for highlighting when the zone, the dynamic zone was activated. And since it's deep water, it would be possible to consider putting some floating aid there, and even just deploying and removing them wouldn't have been practical. So we come up with that solution. And we try to augment that also with what we call an ASM, with the area notice. Unfortunately, the area notice is not a message that is very well managed at this time on shipborne equipment, which was kind of disappointing. So I think next, please. So we arrived to the conclusion of this presentation. So we have not discussed that much about the recommendation. I think Omar has introduced that at the beginning, but what we can say now is those two documents regarding virtual are now reflecting better the knowledge of this technology, and it's been really helpful, gathering the information from the AI set on testing from different countries. So I guess we made a good actualization of the ILR documentation. Further, virtual AI Saturn practical application are now incorporated in these documents. So, and I guess maybe we'll find out other applications as the years go by. Document maintain a cautious approach for virtual deployment while detailing various possibilities. So we try to balance well between the limitation, but also the benefits. As you can see in the document and the guidelines, is the figures, a lot of figures were added. And these are interesting figures because they actually show what is displayed to the mariner. So content was updated and made more consistent. And finally, like I shown the example with the ice coverage and all that. So we needed to add a new section for the confined waters, and the driver for that was the fact that in restricted waters, the impact of any offset in position for your virtual has more impact than in coastal or ocean navigation. So the fact there's limited maneuverability makes it important to make sure that users and national authorities understand very well the limitation and implication of proceeding with virtual into confined waters. So now I think we're in the I think I will revert to Omar for the question period.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation, and nice and easygoing, no panic, very well delivered. And we have a few questions. We have one hand, but before that, we have had some questions coming in the chat. So I will have a look at these. The last question in the chat is about message 8. In ACE navigation or in ATON, what is the use of AIS message 8? Does it have any role in virtuality? I think that's a quick one to answer. Anybody, one of the presenters, please? Maybe Mats?
I think Yves.
Oh, Yves?
Yeah.
The correct answer. So please, Yves.
Yeah, message 8 is associated mostly with sensors that can be added to your AIS ATON. So, for example, on the floating aid, if you would have like a wave height sensors or current profiler, so you would gather that information, and that would be broadcast as part of a message 8 and not a message 21. The 21 is really dedicated to the AIS ATON itself. So is the question is having a virtual that would broadcast at the same time a message 8. I'm not sure you can associate it. You could associate those two. I would presume more that it will have to be connected to a physical AIS ATON rather than a virtual in order to broadcast that message 8. And message 8 are part of the AIS ASM, which is the application-specific messages, which is the other field that's very popular also as a safety-related feature for the mariners. So we're testing those two in Canada, and I think we have mixed success. I would say they're very interesting as navigation-related feature, but the issue is more on the shipborne side as to they're not necessarily shown. So we have tested the ice routes, we have tested also the area messages, the air gap, and the MET-IDO are the most popular one, and the MET-IDO is probably the one that's displaying the best. I hope this answer.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. A couple of other questions from the same Serge Meben is asking about can we have a buoy enabled with virtual ACE navigation? How is it used in this? This is a physical aid and a virtual aid connected. I don't know if you can elaborate a little bit about that. You mentioned something about that earlier in the presentation, I think.
If I can take that one, yeah. I would say that you could have actually, well, most of the physical AIS ATON unit that you buy from the manufacturer have the capability to program a synthetic and virtual also, not hundreds, but a few of them, maybe 2 or 3. So I think that answers part of the question, but it is, if the question is to know if we could use a virtual on top of an actual physical AIS ATON or floating aid, that is not the case, because the nature of virtual is not been associated with any H navigation at all. I mean, no physical H navigation at all. That's mostly what the synthetic is, rather.
Yeah, one could argue that the physical aid, if it's in the map or in the chart already, there's no need to put a symbol on top of that, a virtual symbol. So another question from the chat, Wim Smets is asking, is saturation of the VHF data link also a valid criteria? I think it goes back to you as well.
Saturation, yeah, we have that's a matter that we were looking at this time, is what we call is the VHF data overload, probably the saturation. So it depends actually of the, well, I would say the ship to ship or ship to shore is the main thing for the AIS, so to say, VHF data link. But I think authorities have to monitor this and be careful with that usage. And actually, well, in Canada, we have one area on the West Coast where sometimes it's problematic. It's close to 50% of usage, but we don't have high dense traffic areas. So you have to consider the number of vessels with the traffic and all that. But that is a consideration, and there is a ILO documentation on that specifically that recommends that where ask members or national authorities to monitor and make sure that there is no overloading. And the impact of that is you're going to lose the faraway targets first. So the system is very well established into that. So you're going to lose the farthest targets. So I think that's positive in the impact itself. So the system is very well established for that.
Yeah, it's robust against that. So now I hope this can go to Sweden. We have the Swedish delegation there. What nature and type of ASTO navigation should we use for search and rescue applications? Floating aid special mark code 30. What use of virtual aids in search and rescue operations? What do you think about that?
Of course, it's possible, and it's a very useful tool for every operation like that, or other special things.
Yeah. I can report actually that in the Danish Maritime Authority, we were playing with the use of application-specific messages, marking the search pattern, the planned search pattern, and also the achieved search area that has been searched using AIS application-specific messages. So it's entirely possible to make use of virtual aids in a fleet of ships in a SAR operation. Yeah. So let me see, there was a hand as well. Let's find out who the hand belongs to. Peter Krogsgaard Sørensen from Denmark. Peter, could you please take your question?
Hello.
Good to see you. Good to see you, by the way.
Yes, good to see you, old friends from Yala. It's been a while. The reason why I raised my hand is just to share with you that we have done quite a number of simulation studies around the world for various ports where we have used or tried to see what was the use of virtual aids to navigation. And there's one specific trend that we see, and that is when we are looking at a passage coming from sea where you have a sharp bend into a port, for example, where you have to line up the ship, and due to circumstances, maybe you have to do a 90-degree bend, and you position normally a fairway buoy such that you can line up the ship correctly. Because the position of this fairway buoy could be causing some interaction risk with the ships, it is quite handy to have a virtual fairway buoy under such circumstances.
Okay, and you say we, just for the benefit of the audience, we have 123 participants from at least 25 countries. When you say we, Peter, who is that?
That's Force Technology sitting in Copenhagen, where we have simulator centers, and we undertake quite a number of international port studies.
Okay, thank you very much for that information. Yeah.
You're welcome.
So actually, we have spent our time. We don't have any more time in the schedule, but I think I will proceed to close the webinar. But we will stay here for a moment afterwards as well, and maybe deal with the remaining questions. There are a few questions in the chat box, but just for the sake of those that need to go somewhere else. I have to mention, of course, the Ayala Intergovernmental Project in conclusion here. We have been an NGO since we were born in 1957, a non-governmental organization, but over the last decade or so, we have undergone a diplomatic process which resulted in a new convention that has been now signed by a number of countries, and there's a signature period which extends until January 2022. So there are now 103 days left of this signature period where coastal states can sign a new convention and become the founding fathers of this new organization, which we will turn into when we have 30 signatures and they have been ratified. Today we have 16 coastal states that have signed. Brazil signed yesterday, and to date also we have 3 states that have ratified or accepted the convention in the parliaments, and so we're on our way to become an intergovernmental organization. So, and I would of course like to encourage all of you to make sure that your governments are well aware of this process, which they are, but encourage them to get on with signing the convention. That would be very nice. And I know for a fact that something is happening back home in Iceland, Greipur. So I would then like to thank the presenters, Mats, Yves, Kjell, for their excellent contribution to this webinar. It was very clear, and clearly there's a lot of interest. 120 participants is we do not always have that many at these webinars, so this is quite a hot topic. And I have to thank you all participants for showing up, and I hope that you have found the information provided interesting and useful. And I must thank the Ayala Secretariat, Isabel, Audrey, Virginia, all of you for making this possible. So keep your distance still for a moment, keep clear of COVID, and hope to see you physically as soon as possible. And the webinar is hereby closed, but we will stop the recording, but we will stay on and discuss some of these questions that are outstanding. Thank you. So, Isabel, if you would, or somebody stop the recording.